Welcome, everyone. My name is Penny Rich. I'm the Vice Chair of the County Commissioners. Chair Dorson was taken away with his day job today and will not be here, and he sends his regrets. If you look at the agenda, Commissioners, we have one change that the manager and chair asked for, and that would be to move Section 8, which is the consent agenda, and Section 11, appointments, prior to Section 5, public hearing. So I have that change on the table. Does anyone else have any changes to the agenda? If not, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second. All those approve, say yes.
Aye.
Okay. And no? All right, so we're going to move those up. We have a public charge. I'm not going to read it to you tonight. We're in the process of updating our public charge. But what we do ask is that everyone respect each other in the room. We will respect you. We ask you to respect us, and we ask you to respect each other. And if you can, please turn your mobile devices and cell phones on to vibrate or silence, please. Okay, we are going to start with our arts moment. We've been doing this for a couple of months now, and it's a great way to start a meeting. So, Katie Murray, take it away.
Hello. Celisa Steele lives in Carborough, North Carolina, where she served as the town's poet laureate from 2013 to 2016. As a member of Carborough Poets Council, she helped plan for the past 6 years Carborough's free, multi-day, multi-venue West End Poetry Festival, which takes place each October. Her poetry has appeared in Poetry South, Tar River Poetry, the Comstock Review, San Pedro River Review, and other publications. In 2011, she published her first chapbook, How Language is Lost. Read more about her poetry at celisasteel.com.
So in the poem that I'll read, there's a brief mention of a legendary sword, a sword that is said to be so sharp that it doesn't cut things apart, but cuts things together. And when we have to do the hard work of grappling with issues and decisions that can be divisive, it's perhaps instructive to consider that maybe the things that divide us could also be the things that connect and unite us. My poem is called Here, Elsewhere. I'm idling in the pickup line at school, and the radio host is talking about the myth of closure, asking the guest psychologist to define the term she coined decades ago. Ambiguous loss applies to divorces, disappearances, dementia, cases where someone is physically absent but psychologically present, or vice versa, body here, mind elsewhere. I can't help but think of my father, unbecoming a parent a bit more each day. His runner's gait turned unsteady shuffle, his memory of my childhood growing tattered, speech taking on the quality of something scripted and read, stilted. It may be cliche to say all living things are dying, but I'm realizing the implication. We're born to loss. Our base state is grieving. But I'm not sad, not now, inching along with the window rolled down so my elbow sits in the sun. I'm enjoying the irony, which I assume the psychologist sees, that her term, meant to communicate uncertainty, brings a kind of closure, the clarity of words. I'm thinking of the sword in the Aikido tradition, said to be so sharp it cuts together, not apart. When one of the fifth graders in a yellow safety vest opens the door and my son, who's grown taller in the last 7 hours, climbs in, complaining about the book he finished during free time. He hates cliffhanger endings. Why stop there if it's not really the end? I realize I've missed the end of the interview, but no matter. Here's my son, his body buckled in the back seat, and the red buds by the stoplight that were covered in purple last week have gone all glossy green. Elsewhere, maybe in the mountains, the little flowers are just blossoming. He's telling me he's hungry, and I understand he craves clarity and closure and more for things to be what they say they are.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. That was wonderful. Appreciate that. Okay, we're on to public comments, and this is matters that are not on the agenda, so if you want to sign up, please do. I have 3 people signed up. The first one is Jim Merritt.
Okay, good evening. I'm Jim Merritt, the co-chair for the Veterans Memorial Committee, and I'm here tonight to invite the board to our first annual Veterans Memorial Rally. This will be a motorcycle rally during the Memorial Day ceremony planned at the Veterans Memorial. The site of the first annual service of remembrance on May 28th at the Veterans Memorial Homestead Road. The service will begin at 7:45 and conclude at 8:30 with the dedication and placing of a memorial wreath. After the ceremony, motorcycle riders will depart for an Orange County motorcycle tour. Kickstands will be up at 9 a.m. for the tour of the county, which will culminate at 10 a.m. when riders reach the American Legion, post number 6 in Chapel Hill. We also still have quite a few bricks that we're selling around the memorial. Bricks are going for $100 for 4x4 and $200 for 4x8. These are sold for family members that you want to commemorate and honor for their service to the military. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Jim?
Just a comment.
Renee? I'm sorry, Commissioner Price.
If you would like to ride in the motorcycle tour, just let Officer Whitehurst know you can.
Did everyone hear that?
No, I'm talking about the elected officials here. If you would like to be in there, you can. Or you can ride in the SUV.
And you can join the officers with your own motorcycle. Jim, how are we doing with fundraising?
We're moving right along. We're right on target. As of the past 3 months, we've raised about $50,000 for the second phase of the project, and we're hoping to raise by about $75,000 by next Veterans Day, so that we can complete that phase of it.
That's great. And there's a website that people can go and order bricks if they want.
Yeah, it's Orange County Veterans Memorial.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Terry Buckner.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. On December 4th, 2017, we, the local Friends of the Mountains to the Sea Trail, petitioned you, the board, to adopt an official trail map for the southern section of the trail. On January 23rd, 2018, you agreed to our request and adopted a concept map while also expressing your support for moving the trail forward at a faster pace. On March 2nd, a small group of us met with Deeper staff to map out the Cane Creek area of the trail route in more detail and identify for them the most feasible location for trail easements. We also identified 2 tracts of land that were for sale at the time, one of which would have made an ideal trailhead. That ideal trailhead now has an offer on it, not from Orange County. To the best of our knowledge, no action has occurred to move the planning on that section of the trail forward since the March 2nd meeting. We were told in that meeting that we could expect to see trail in the Cane Creek area within 3 to 4 years. We're not sure if that timeline is simply to establish the trail map or to open the trail to hikers, but our expert trail builder estimates that it will take over 2 years to build the approximately 8 miles of trail from Ed Johnson's property on Buckhorn Road across to Mebane Oaks. We feel like construction on that section could have begun this fall if staff had started formalizing the freely offered easements after the January 23rd map adoption. On January 25th, I attended an NCDOT meeting on the Highway 54 corridor and made NCDOT aware of the intent to link the Alamance County section of the Mountains to the Sea Trail with the Orange County section near the intersection at Saxpahaw Bethlehem Church Road and Highway 54. I discussed with them the possibility of including a trailhead like the one they built on the Haw River, at the Haw River at 15501 for us. They expressed willingness to discuss this with Orange County, and I passed that contact information along to DEPR staff. On May 2nd, I attended a follow-up meeting with NCDOT and saw the trailhead was not drawn into their revised map. I was told they have contacted Orange County but haven't received a response. As part of our attempts to partner with DEPR to make the MST a reality, the Friends agreed to provide volunteer labor for a February trail building session at 7 Mile Creek. We expended considerable effort to recruit skilled volunteers for that session in order to establish a positive working relationship. A couple of days before the session, we were notified that due to an administrative glitch, the materials would not be available to undertake the planned work, and the work session was canceled. That was the last communication we've had with DEPR. According to your 2018 capital investment plan, the second phase, I'll finish this paragraph and Alan's going to finish the statement. The second phase of the MST project is proposed for year 2, the one that's coming up right now, and would address the segment of the MST from Buckhorn Road around and on the Owasso-owned land at Cane Creek Reservoir, continuing to the Alamance County line. However, we did not find any specific action items laid out for meeting that goal.
And Alan Green, you're the next speaker.
That was Ric Flair. I'm Hulk Hogan. We're tag teaming here.
Welcome.
Hello. We did, however, find that the following in the Parks and Recreation Council Plan of Action for 2018. First, to continue to participate in the Mountains to Sea project as a way station, and trailhead locations are identified in the coming year at 7 Mile Creek and potentially other locations. And there is a note on page 47, 48 of the BOCC agenda. In that same document, we also found reference to the need for assessing the proposed multimodal trail. There are at least 2 significant reasons to not continue delaying action on the Cane Creek section of the trail. First, the land is turning over in that area, and more similar tracts are being sold. The more residents who move in out there, the harder it is going to be to get the trail sited and built. Second, as we have said before, some of those who are willing to give free easements are getting older, and not only do they want to be assured that the easements are codified before they, but they also want to be able to hike the trail while they are still able. We completely understand that the DEPR is a small department with a significant workload. That's why we have made so many efforts to help move the MST project forward. We don't want to wait another 3 or 4 years for trail to actually be built. This has been going on since 2009. If the county is going to move forward with this project beyond the Hillsborough area, it's time to do it instead of dragging it out while undertaking new competing projects. So here's what we ask. Year 2 begins in July, and we would like to have a concrete plan of action that includes a commitment to work with the NCDOT to establish a trailhead at Highway 54 and Saxo Bethlehem Church Road. We'd like this commitment made tonight. A commitment to finalize the freely offered easements in the Cane Creek area by the end of August, and establishment of a joint oversight committee between the Friends of the MST, county staff, the Board of Commissioners, and OWASA before your summer break. The goal of this committee would be to develop an action plan for the Cane Creek section of the trail, followed by a similar plan for Cane Creek to Hillsborough, and then to help guide the plan through to implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Alan and Terry, and I'll take that as a petition so we can get a reply back, and we'll have staff take a look at that. Ms. Hammersley, do you want to add anything to that?
No, we'll bring back a status report for the board and for the Friends of the Mountains to Sea Trail.
Great. Thank you so much. I have no one else to speak on matters not on the agenda. Does anyone want to speak? Okay, we're going to move on. Announcements, petitions, and comments by board members, and we're going to try and keep this at 3 minutes. And Commissioner McKee, since you came in last, you go first.
No comment tonight.
I have several. Just briefly, the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro MPO had a meeting last weekend, released the list of projects for the allocation of local input points, and therefore opening the public comment period. Secondly, we all received a resolution from Pasquotank County regarding the North Carolina school bond, and I also received a template from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners that would go to local chambers of commerce to try to get their input or their support for the bond. And I am petitioning this board to consider doing one, to take up either resolution, either as, well, both actually, to support the bond for this board to do so, and also to encourage our 2 local chambers of commerce to do so. Third, the Central Orange High School reunion is happening this month, and they're having a big reunion weekend. And the significance of this year is that it marks 50 years since the end of segregated schools in the Orange County school system, and they have a host of activities planned. And lastly, I would also support getting an action plan on the MST. That's it.
Commissioner Jacobs?
I'll second that. I think we're overdue responding to the requests we've been getting about moving the MST forward in a more expedited manner. I wanted to express my condolences to the family of Elsie Pickett, who was a great community activist and an expert on how to put up a campaign sign. I also wanted to congratulate in advance all the teachers who are going to Raleigh tomorrow to fight for not only themselves, but for quality public education in a state where the predominant party in the legislature wants to dismantle public education. And I hope they're at least feel empowered by their efforts. And I also wanted to report to the board that we had the first meeting of the Orange Chatham Work Group, or maybe it's the Chatham Orange Work Group. And we learned a lot about Chatham County. And we're going to meet again in October, and it was a very collegial meeting with a lot of good information.
Commissioner Markopoulos?
Yeah, so as I heard about all the school systems joining in for the Day of Advocacy, I was feeling really good about that effort, and I know there's a lot of energy, and really appreciate the fact that communities are standing up and helping teachers in this way. But there was one part of it that really stuck with me when I realized the depth of hunger issues among children in the county. One of the key issues that arose whenever we discussed what we were going to do when the teachers weren't there and the schools were closed was so many kids that weren't going to get food. And while I was aware of poverty in Orange County, it stunned me that it was as deep as it is. And I certainly don't know exactly what to do with it, but I think we need to be concentrating on it some in the near future and figuring out how we can make some progress on that.
Commissioner Burrows?
No comments tonight.
I have 2 real quick, and I just want to make a comment on Commissioner Markopoulos. this might be something that we can charge the Food Council with to see if they can look into it and bring that around and just bring it full circle for us to find out what we can be doing more for the schools, because I think there is room to move. I also want to congratulate the teachers in advance for their bold move tomorrow. And just to comment on the meeting with Chatham, we did learn a lot about Chatham, and one thing that struck me was Chatham is starting to feel a little bit of pressure moving people around. Chatham Transit is a nonprofit bus. It's not run by the county, although the county does pay for a good portion of it. And what they need to do is move people towards Chapel Hill. And they are trying to do their best to get people to UNC and connect with either Orange Transit or Chapel Hill Transit. And Craig was at the meeting, and he said he's going to try and do a better job of figuring out those connections. But I'd like to put this in a petition form that we actually do make those connections and try to put a plan together, because Chatham is growing in leaps and bounds. We learned this, and they're going to be moving more and more people into Orange County where they work. So we've got to be ready for this. I think we need to be thinking into the future about that. And that would be it. So if everyone would move to number 8, the consent agenda next. And does anyone want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I'd like to pull 8D.
8D.
And
Okay.
B and C? You going to do B?
Okay. So we have
I was going to do D.
B and C, Commissioner Price, and 8D, Commissioner,
Key.
did you say D or E, sir?
D.
E, okay.
D is in dog.
Dog. For you, you would like to pull D? Okay.
I think Commissioner McKee pulled D.
Okay, so we have A and F left. Can I get a motion to move that?
Sure. Yes. So moved.
Second.
So we have Jacobs and McKee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Price, 8B.
Yes, I pulled this basically to congratulate the Piedmont Food and Agricultural Processing Center for getting the Golden Leaf Foundation grant, and to let people, I think it's worth letting people know what is going on with PFAP and how they can also be involved. And it really is.
If I may,
Yeah,
if I
of
may
course.
add.
Yes, please.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you. PFAP is fully subscribed. There's almost no room for new clients, because there are so many people who are using it now that they're essentially built out, and there's some discussion about how it might expand. But it's doing very well. It's actually showing a small profit, and it continues to move on things like meeting on female entrepreneurs. It'll be the third meeting of the group that's working on that, and I believe they got a grant to help facilitate that. So they're trying to branch out and be a more efficient and effective member of the community.
And I will move that.
Moved by Commissioner Price,
Second.
second by Commissioner Jacobs. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Price. And now we have C, Family Success Alliance.
Yeah, I pulled this one just for clarification on the number of people that are going to be employed. I guess, with this FTE and the different calculations, I was getting a little confused on how many people were actually, new people are coming on board, or is it sharing of duties, or what?
Good evening. So to answer your question, Commissioner Price, we're not adding any new staff with these numbers here. What they're looking to do is increase some of the hours for the existing staff, getting them closer to some full-time hours.
Okay. So you have each one full-time equivalent navigator, and then you're requesting an increase of 2.25, and somehow you get 3.75 with benefits?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
I would get 3.25. Or are you considering that they're already working?
Considering they're already here, yeah.
Okay,
These are-
all right,
Okay,
that's it.
thank you.
So,
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Stewart.
thank you. So I will move that item.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Price, second by Burrows. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. And then we're going to D.
Yes, Madam Chair. This, so that our guests will know what I'm speaking to, this item 8D is an update on impervious surface regulations for subdivisions platted before 1994. And it's a clarification on transfer between parcels for impervious surface. I don't really have a problem with this. I think that it is a step forward in addressing some what I consider overly onerous regulations limiting impervious surface on some of these subdivision lots because of impervious surfaces burned up in the roadways. The reason I pulled this was that I would, and I could have done this in the previous segment on petitions, but I wanted to tie it with this. What I do want to petition the board is that we direct staff to bring back an abstract at some time, probably in the fall, because I know we've got a busy schedule this spring and they're busy, to take a more comprehensive look at impervious surface standards and impervious surface percentages as applied to small lots in Orange County, because I know we do have quite a few lots that are flag lots, and a lot of their impervious surface is used up in their roadways or driveways. So that's, other than that, I will, unless someone else has a comment, I'll move the motion.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Yeah, I just had a question for Mr. Harvey. Are we to assume that the statement about the ability to transfer impervious surface from one adjacent parcel to another, the sum total of the regulation? Or when this comes back to us, is there going to be more detail?
Michael Harvey, current Planning Division. We are in the process of writing the ordinance. It is our position, Commissioner Jacobs, that this ordinance seeks to do two things. Number one, it seeks to clarify processes for subdivisions that were platted and developed prior to the county adopting countywide watershed management strategies and policies. It was at that point in time comprehensive and universal impervious surface limits were established. And we're seeking to address concerns arising out of people not adhering to what we currently do today, which is cumulatively track impervious surface from roadways prior to any development. Two, there's an existing allowance that permits the transfer of impervious surface from parcels that are adjacent to one another. We believe that to be unnecessarily limiting and believe it should be allowed between parcels in the same watershed. We are going to be proposing caps on how much impervious surface can be transferred for a couple different reasons. Chiefly, we don't want to make property undevelopable because it transfers too much impervious surface to another parcel, and we certainly don't want a parcel of property to have more impervious surface than it can handle from a stormwater management standpoint. So yes, the direct answer to your question, there's not only going to be caps, there's going to be limitations on how much total impervious can be transferred through this process. And that's somewhat consistent with the stormwater management standards you all approved a couple years ago that would have allowed additional impervious surface with the development of a stormwater management feature.
Other questions?
Move the item.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then last we have E, school adequate public facilities. Did anyone pull that one?
No.
Oh, then I mistakenly took that out.
I'll move approval of E.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to 11, and that would be our appointments. And first up, let's see, 11A. Sorry. We are doing aging. Okay. So we have 3 positions for aging, and there are 3 recommendations. Does anyone want to make motion?
Yes, I will move Michael Zuber for position 3, Alicia Nelson, position 8, James Harris, position 9.
And
Second.
we have second. Any other nominations for that? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's moved. And then we're going to do 11B, and that is Board of Health appointments. And we have 4 positions open for that.
I will nominate Dr. Bruce Baldwin for 5, Barbara Chavis for position 6, Timothy Smith for 7, and Keith Bagby for position 8.
And Mr. Bagley is not on the recommendation, but Commissioner
No.
Price is putting him in position 8. Can I get a second on that?
Second on that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have got that down. Thank you. All right, and we're going to bounce back to 5 now. And this is the Unified Development Ordinance Text Amendment, Flags and Flagpoles. The board will hold a public hearing on a Planning Director, County Attorney Office Initiative, Unified Development Ordinance, also known as the UDO, text amendment clarifying regulations associated with flags and flagpoles. The board will consider decisions on the following options. We can adopt the proposed amendments by approving the statement of consistency, and then we can either approve the proposed ordinance, which is Amendment 4, or we can approve the proposed ordinance, Amendment 4, and then there is an amendment to that, which is, Attachment 4 and Attachment 7. We can defer the decision for a later BOCC regular meeting date, or we can refer the item back to the Planning Board for a specific purpose. And Mr. Harvey, the floor is yours.
Again, Michael Harvey, Orange County Planning Department. I'm going to be summarizing the abstract in front of you concerning a Unified Development Ordinance text amendment concerning the regulation or clarifying regulations associated with flags and flagpoles. So beginning on page 4 of your abstract, we have the UDO amendment outline form establishing the chronology of how this process not only was initiated, but the steps that the staff took to have the amendment reviewed. Beginning on page 8, you have an excerpt of the draft April 4th, 2018 Planning Board minutes and the board's approved statement of consistency. As the chair has already pointed out, attachments 3 and 4 are a statement of consistency that you will need to adopt, signifying that the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Beginning on page 16, you have the actual ordinance amendment package. We have included in Attachment 5 the legal advertisement for the public hearing. In Attachment 6, which begins on page 27, you have a fact sheet that was put together by staff. That's staff from the County Attorney's Office and the planning staff. And then last but not least, in Attachment 7, beginning on page 30, you have a County Attorney's modification of the proposed amendment for your consideration. So to put this information as succinctly as humanly possible, on March the 20th, the County Attorney's Office and the planning staff was directed to initiate a Unified Development Ordinance text amendment to address concerns over the purported lack of clear and comprehensive regulations, ensuring that flags, the display of a flag does not dominate local skylines, and as well as to clarify regulations on the height, location, and number of flagpoles that could be erected, and the allowable size of flags. This item, which was drafted in consultation with the County Attorney's Office, was presented to the Planning Board, as I've already indicated, at their April 4th meeting. And to summarize the minutes from that meeting, which is again already provided for you in attachment, the proposed amendment would establish regulations in residential districts, and that would include the rural buffer, the agricultural residential, rural residential, and other similar residential zoning districts, allowing the erection of a single flagpole with a maximum height of 24 feet, and allowing for the maximum display of 3 flags, either on the flagpole or on the property. In non-residential districts, which includes local commercial, general commercial, and the economic development districts, you would have a flag that would be a total of 54 feet in height, and have a flag a maximum 96 square feet in area, or 8 by 12. As recommended, flag poles would be set back 50 feet from all property lines, and there is an amortization policy established within the ordinance amendment compelling compliance within 1 year of adoption of this ordinance. One point I want to bring out, there were several questions about the amortization policy, and for those reading along, I'm on page 11 of your abstract package before the planning board, where specifically staff was asked the amortization policy covering not only the flag itself being brought in compliance with size limits, but the flag pole. It was our determination at that point in time, based on the wording of the ordinance, that flag poles would have to comply with the ordinance within 1 year of adoption. And that's what we had stated at the planning board meeting. There is a difference in interpretation of that section. I'll let the county attorney speak a little more intelligently on that than I can. I will also point out that at the conclusion of the planning board meetings, the planning staff was asked questions if they understood that there were schools, fire departments, and other institutional land uses in residential districts that had multiple flagpoles. The answer is yes, we were fully aware of that. There are several volunteer fire departments, including White Cross, Eno, and New Hope, that have multiple poles, some of which were in the 50-foot setback, and most of the schools in Orange County have multiple poles, some of which within the required setback, and again, more than we would currently allow under this ordinance. So, in summary, what you're being asked to do this evening, as the chair has already alluded, is hold this public hearing, review the proposed ordinance amendment, ask questions of staff, accept public comment, and deliberate on the proposal. As the chair has also already pointed out, the county attorney's office has provided some additional context and additional opportunities or additional amendment options for you to consider. That's included on page or attachment 7, beginning page 30 of your ordinance amendment packet. If any of you have any questions that I can address at this time, I will. If not, I'll turn it over to the county attorney's office for additional comment.
Questions for Mr. Harvey? Commissioner BOCC and then Price.
Yes, did I understand correctly that the flag poles themselves would be out of compliance after a year? Anything over?
That's what I informed the planning board during their meeting. Yes, sir.
Do we know how many government entity, i.e. county offices and schools, have poles that are over this height?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Price.
How did you determine only 3 flags? I know that there was discussion about if you wanted the American flag, the state, and the county, but what if you wanted 2 government flags and there's somebody that's an avid Duke fan and someone that's an avid UNC fan? You can't put all 4 up?
Well, the honest answer to that question is within the time frame that the county commissioners allotted staff, this is what we came up with. We base this ordinance on similar regulatory standards from Durham County in an effort to ensure a content-neutral ordinance consistent with several court cases saying, well, you can't ban flags, but you can regulate number, size, and location. If you have alternative direction for us in terms of a number, we'd be more than happy to consider it.
So there is no, I shouldn't say no reason, but I don't know how else to frame it. There's no reason for the 3 other than this is what Durham does.
We attempted to establish a reasonable number. I will remind you all that the county attorney's office has informed you on at least 2 occasions that there's actually state laws indicating you have to allow for the display of state, federal, and a flag of local jurisdiction. You cannot deny people the right to display those flags at a minimum. So I think that the best way to answer your question is the determination at the time was it was reasonable to follow that model.
Okay.
And I think that is the answer. State law requires that local governments allow those 3 flags, state, nation, and a local government flag. So that's the reason, from my point of view anyway, for 3 flags per pole.
Well, I could see that if it was government property, but I'm just thinking in someone's private, in your yard, if you wanted to I mean, if you had three or four children and they each wanted to put a flag up for whatever reason.
Then if you have an alternative direction for the staff, I'm sure we'd love to hear it.
Okay.
Commissioner Jacobs?
Could you just clarify for me, on page 2, it talks about, pardon?
Say page 2. Oh, okay.
It seems to sever the allowable height of a pole from the height of the building it's associated with.
I'll let not to interrupt you, sir, but that's actually going to be covered by the county attorney. So if there's
Okay,
no more
well-
questions for me, I'll let the attorney provide that.
Okay, but let me just finish the question. On page 28, it states that it's not going to be related to the existing structures. So I assume that'll be clarified?
That's an option. That was a commissioner-requested change, and to me, that makes sense so that you'll have a consistency county-wide for height, rather than if a dwelling unit has a flat roof, then it's only 12 or 13 feet high, versus another single-story dwelling unit with maybe an A-frame from the 70s that may be 20 feet high. You get it go up to, I think, 24 feet on a residential lot. So if you got a 20-foot house and a 12-foot house, you could have 12-foot pole and a 20-foot pole right next to each other if the lots are adjacent. So that change is made for consistency.
Consistency in total height? Or
In maximum
consistency-
flagpole height per type of lot.
So they could both have 24-foot
Yes.
poles? Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Harvey?
Yeah, just one more.
Price.
Why are cemeteries different? Or why are we regulating cemeteries? And does this include private ones, like a church-owned cemetery?
I don't understand the question. We've provided an exemption for any cemetery, whether it be public or private. It doesn't matter. A cemetery is a cemetery, I think, is part of your question.
Well, it says
But we're going to allow the erection of small display flags on grave sites. We did not want to overly impede, especially during Veterans Day, 4th of July, or Memorial Day, people from erecting a flag to honor a fallen soldier at a grave site.
Well, it says flags no greater than 12 inches in height may be displayed at individual grave sites within a cemetery. And so this would be for all public, private, church?
Yeah, any cemetery, because we don't have a distinction between a public and private cemetery from the standpoint, it's who is interred there that's the important issue. We didn't want to limit it.
But if it's owned by a church or congregation?
Again, Commissioner,
Okay.
there's no distinction.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roberts, would you like to follow up?
Ownership neutral, too.
I was just going to provide some additional background for the board and for the public who are here and who may be watching. As you'll recall, this issue came up because of a rumor that an excessively large flag was going up on a residential lot. The board got a number of telephone and email complaints that there were residential lots were not appropriate for really large flags. A lot of those complaints focused on one type of flag. But once the board and I and planning staff started looking at it, we realized that our ordinance, although it does regulate flags, was not clear that it regulated the size or height that flags may be flown on residential or commercial property. So we notified the board of that, and the board instructed staff to bring back an ordinance without regard to its content that regulates flags. So the ordinance that you've got in front of you, both of them, the one recommended by planning staff and the one with some minor changes that I've recommended, are content neutral. The law the law in the country is clear that content neutrality is a lawful method of regulating speech issues. Flying flags, displaying flags is a freedom of expression issue, and that's why this ordinance does not address content at all. Anybody that's got a flag of any type right now can continue to fly that flag if it fits within the dimensions that are proposed in the ordinance. If the board adopts this, they'll be able to fly whatever flags on their property now for a year. As Mr. Harvey noted, there's a one-year amortization on the flag itself, 1 year that they would have to come into compliance and replace that flag with one that complies with the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. As I mentioned, there is clear case law that this is within a local government's authority. Durham, directly adjacent to Orange County, and some of the city of Durham is even in Orange County, a very small part, has a flag ordinance. They regulate the size of flags, and that case, American Legion versus the city of Durham, went all the way to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal appellate court having jurisdiction over North Carolina, and that case was upheld in Durham's favor, allowing them to continue to regulate flags based on the appropriateness, size of the lot and the size of the flag, because I don't think anybody who is on the smallest county lots, which can be 50 feet in our zoning ordinance, 50 feet wide, I don't think anybody can envision a 90 or 100-foot flagpole with a 500-square-foot flag on it. But it's not clear that that would be prohibited under the current ordinance, and this language would do that. So it protects property values of the neighbors, and as the board instructed, will protect local skylines as well. And the only other thing is Mr. Harvey mentioned the flagpole. It's not my interpretation of the way either ordinance is written that a flagpole will be subject to the amortization provision. If a flagpole is taken down voluntarily, knocked down through accident or natural act, it would need to be replaced with a flagpole that complies. But we're not going to require churches and schools and nonprofits and private residents to replace existing flagpoles under these ordinances unless they come down. So they are not subject to the amortization, but that is subject to the board's discretion of what you want to do with it.
Questions for Mr. Roberts? Well, I have a question then. So the flag itself is, has to be compliant within a year,
Yes,
the size of the flag.
that's correct.
The pole does not.
No, it is not subject to the amortization requirement that the flag is, so no. It is subject immediately to the terms of the ordinance, but it won't have to be removed and replaced unless it comes down by natural act or someone takes it down. Then they'll have to replace it with a pole that is compliant.
Can you fly a compliant flag on the existing pole?
Yes.
So that height restriction then does not count until that pole falls down or is
The way
destroyed?
that's correct. The way it's written now, but again, that is subject to the board's approval.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I think that answered my question.
That answered your question?
I think it did. yes.
Okay. Mr. Roberts, do we have to open up the public hearing, or are we considered open?
You can open the public hearing.
Okay, I need a motion to open the hearing.
So moved.
Second.
McKee and Price, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We have a lot of folks that want to speak. Here's what we're going to do. When you come up to the podium, the Commissioner Markopoulos is going to turn the timer on. You have 3 minutes to speak. It starts green. When it turns orange, that means you have 30 seconds left, and you should be pulling your thoughts together. When it turns red, if you're mid-sentence, please finish, and we're going to respect that so everybody else can speak. So we're going to start with Craig Carter, and right behind him is Alpha Cravey. Mr. Carter?
First, I'd like to thank y'all for serving on the board. I know it takes time from your families, so I appreciate it. And also what I got to say, Earl McKee, my father knew him, so whatever I say don't represent Mr. McKee, okay? So I want to clarify that. I am a grandson, great-grandson of a Confederate soldier. I'm also the great-great-great-grandson of a soldier that fought in the Revolutionary War. I've lost an uncle in the Solomon Islands. I lost an uncle in the Vietnam. My family has. I had an uncle that shot in Normandy, and they brought my uncle's body back twice from Solomon Islands, and they can't tell him it's him. But if you'd like to read his girlfriend's letters, they're in the library here at the university. And his name was Arnold Ellis. But my problem with the flag thing is it shouldn't be a racial issue. I think the flag that y'all really commenting about is just a finger to the board because they don't want the jail there. You know what I mean? I'm from Northern Orange County. I can understand it. I can see both sides of it. I don't care. That is the battle flag of Virginia. That is not the Confederate flag. That's Robert E. Lee's flag. The Confederate flag does not even look like that. I have a real Confederate flag if you'd like to see one. But that's not the Confederate flag of all the 13 states that ceded from the Union. But I'd like to call to your attention that we have a fire station in Mr. McKee's district, don't even fly a flag because there ain't nobody there. My neighbor passed away in January. It took 8.5 minutes for a fire truck for anybody to get there. Now, we worried about a flagpole. We got the lawyers here. We got TV cameras here. I just want an ambulance. You know, I'm not asking for a lot. And she made a statement about the North Carolina Central School reunion, and I have something on that too. My mother fell last year on Palmer's Grove Church Road and busted her face, lost her teeth, concussion. Took an hour to get an ambulance. My mother-in-law was a county employee at the tax office. She got killed at Mount Zion Church Road, is in the northern part of the county. She laid out there for over an hour. The ambulance came from Chapel Hill to the northern part of the county. Now, if it takes over an hour for us to get an ambulance, why are we worried about this? I mean, let it go down in history. It's going to go away if y'all just let it die. If you stare up the outhouse, it will smell. So, but there's other things I could say about that. But there also there's a lot of historical houses downtown. Even like 1844, the courthouse was built 1932, I think Central African American High School was built. There's no monuments or nothing to the slaves of Orange County that built all this stuff. And we're talking about this, and there's all down St. Mary's Road. You can see $1 million houses that were built by slaves and had slave kitchens, but we don't talk about that. So that's, you know, that's my comments, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Arthur Cravey, and then James Ward.
My name's Altha Cravey. Like it or not, our community is dominated by a company town named Chapel Hill. The products are not textiles, but they're graduates of UNC. UNC is a public institution. I've worked there for 24 years. It belongs to all of us in the state. It's the oldest public university. It's struggling, though, I have to say, and it's relevant to your decision here. It's struggling, UNC is struggling with its legacy of elitism. It was built for the white sons of the wealthy slave owners. The legacy of elitism is the reason UNC has a monument to the Confederacy on a pedestal. That monument in the past year has been a lightning rod for violence and threats of violence. It's been, if you spend time there, like I have on Fridays during the last year, you can see many of these threats of violence, and you would know what I mean when I say it's a lightning rod, but perhaps you've looked at that. These mega-sized Confederate flags that are going up in our state and in our county are part of this violence and this continuum of threats that I'm saying is very present at the Confederate Monument on UNC's campus. The Confederate Monument went up in 1913, and it was put there as a reminder of the Jim Crow order of things that every one of us should stay in our place. I want to thank the county commissioners for their leadership in considering a content-neutral uniform, what's it called, the Uniform Development Ordinance. I think this is the right way to go. I think it's constitutional. I want to thank you for your leadership. At UNC, we're unlikely to have similar leadership, and we've been struggling to try to inform the leaders, even though students and staff and faculty and community members have been struggling, and we will take down Silent Sam. We've been struggling to take it down, but I see these Confederate flags as part of the payback for that and the threat because we want to take it down and because it will come down. I support the proposed ordinance. I think that public roadways, like Highway 70, just like public universities, must be places that welcome all our citizens. And your proposed ordinance is designed to do that, to make sure that our public throughways, our highways, are going to be welcoming places and that they won't have huge hate symbols flying alongside them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Craven. James Ward and Robert Randall. James Ward. James Ward, and then Robert Randall.
I'm James Ward from Orange County. I'm here tonight to speak against the proposed revision to the Unified Development Ordinance, which would restrict outdoor flag size. Although any restriction would apply to all flags, this is a transparent attempt to act against the 160-year-old Confederate battle flag. This issue of giant flags in orange never would have arisen if not for the actions and efforts in the last few years by some people to ban everything Confederate in Orange County. For example, the removal of the sign from the old Hillsborough Library because it had the name Confederate on it, changing the name of Sanders Hall on the UNC campus, and banning all things Confederate from Orange County schools. Also, let's not forget, as a lady previous to me said, the persistent attempts to remove the Confederate memorial statue at UNC. All these efforts were made because some people termed these years-old symbols as offensive and made the baseless charge that they were threatening. These anti-Confederate heritage moves engendered a lot of resentment and downright anger among many people in this community. A reaction was predictable. Orange County and its communities desire to be considered diverse and welcoming to all types. I hold these same sentiments, but I would urge you to extend that attitude to all of us, even to those of us who wish only to honor the legacy and memory of our forefathers. Therefore, I urge you to table this proposal tonight so that you can spend your time on more pressing matters. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Ward. We have Robert Randall and then Heather Redding.
Our county attorney correctly states that Orange County cannot regulate the content of a flag, as that content falls under free speech. Yet that is precisely the reason the commissioners are considering a UOD regulating the size of the flagpole's height, its location on one's property, and the number of flagpoles allowed on a parcel of land. This whole issue wouldn't be discussed if it weren't for the Confederate flag on US 70. I have no special affinity for the Confederate flag. I have no desire to fly one on my own property. However, many Orange County citizens, including myself, see this as your attempt to limit free speech. I understand that the Stars and Bars flag is offensive to some. Many things are offensive to me, one of which is the burning of the American flag for which many fought and died. Yet the flag burner has the constitutional right to burn one. Again, it's free speech. Being offended should never trump constitutional rights. I ask you not to go down the road of limiting our free speech rights. We don't need a one-size-fits-all county ordinance regulating flags. I ask the board to table this issue as Orange County has gotten along just fine for many, many years without such an ordinance. One last thing for you to consider is this. Limiting our free speech could result in many more Confederate flags being displayed around our county as a sign of protest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. We have Heather Redding and Nan Fletcher.
Good evening. My name is Heather Redding. I'm a resident of Orange County and a member of Hillsborough Progressives Taking Action. Thank you, Commissioners, for your responsiveness to the concerns of the larger community. In the spirit of the content-neutral ordinance proposal under discussion tonight, I think it's important to remember that land ownership does not bestow upon us unlimited rights. Just like the Second Amendment doesn't extend to children and felons, and the right to vote can be taken away from those with criminal records, our right to free speech is not unlimited in scope. People who oppose this ordinance are characterizing it as constitutionally unsound and seem to be under the impression that government can't and shouldn't ever impose regulations that apply to private property. However, the current UDO already limits what we can do on our property in regards to signage and has for years without complaint or threats of lawsuits. In section 6.12.3, the UDO currently states, "No person shall erect or maintain a sign, and no property owner shall allow a sign to be erected or maintained on his property except in conformity with these regulations." Section 6.12.6 is titled Prohibited Signs and lists numerous banned forms of signage. As a property owner in Orange County, I can't reasonably expect that I could raise a massive flag with the image of a noose, or a phrase encouraging violence, or graphic nudity, or private information like someone's social security number. I can't put up a sign, large or small, with threatening text, such as the comment that appeared on ACTBAC's Facebook page by one of their followers, and I quote, "Let us put a noose rope for Maya Little's neck under her neck, get snapped by death punishment from our Confederate government's order, not Governor Cooper." And let us not forget that ACTBAC is an SPLC designated hate group, and the responses from their members of the group to this issue has lived up to that designation. I encourage the board to vote affirmatively to pass the proposed UDO amendment. There is no constitutional violation inherent in this content-neutral policy, only the expected pushback whenever progress is being made in the realm of racial justice. The neo-Confederates who harbor a vendetta chose the wrong county to flag, the wrong community to threaten, and the wrong people to intimidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Redden. Ann Fulcher, and then L.A. Evelyn. I'm sorry, I pronounced your name wrong.
My name's Nan Fulcher. I'm from Orange County, and I support the text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance. This regulation addresses the messages that are on display in our community. Every message we see affects us as individuals, whether it's the big corporate fast food signs or the campaign election signs stuck in the ground. Whether you're walking, driving, or in the neighborhood or town or out in the rural areas, public or private spaces, messaging impacts us all. Each community should be able to decide whether or not they'd like to limit its reach. And over the years, Orange County has put careful thought into regulating signs for businesses and other developments. As a result, our area has been less burdened by the blight of unrestricted, in-your-face signage that many communities have suffered. The preference for limited signage is balanced by the needs of commerce, government, and the people. As for limits on signage and display that in turn may limit free speech is not an unconditional right. In setting a legal limit to free speech, one consideration is whether there are sufficient alternatives in place, other outlets that an individual or groups wishing to express the same idea, be it words or symbols, to the public through other means. In the case of the text amendment that is considered tonight, that condition for free speech is met because what is limited is the size of the message, not content or nature.
Thank you, Ms. Fulcher. We have L.A. Elvin and then Olivia Strong.
Good evening.
Good evening.
May I approach and give you a couple of photographs?
You can give it to the clerk, please.
You're the ones that can see it. I don't have a dog so much in this fight. My purpose here is somewhat selfish. I live on a property in which the dimensions of the property preclude me from having my flag. It cost me a couple $100 to put that up. I fly the national colors and the Marine Corps flag. I'm confused after hearing Mr. Roberts and Mr. Harvey. I don't know whether I can keep my flag up now or not. Can someone help me with that?
Well, Mr. Elvin, we don't know what your property looks like, but we can certainly have Mr. Harvey. It's a photograph. Mr. Roberts, do you want to reply to that?
Well, one of the recommendations is to reduce the setback from 50 feet to 20 feet. And the reason for that is to accommodate smaller lots. The county's smallest allowable lots are 50 feet. If we leave in place the originally suggested 50-foot setback, that would prohibit people from flying flags. So that's why it's been proposed
I have a
to be
drainage
reduced.
easement going over my place, so that's going to affect my
Mr. Elvin, it seems as though we'll be able to work with you, so we can contact Mr. Harvey or the attorney, and we'll work with you to see what your property actually is.
All I fly is the national colors, and
And that's fine, and we'll work with you to make sure that your property, that you'll be able to have your flagpole. I'm looking at your property, and I think you will be in compliance.
I thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Mr. Roberts, thank you.
Olivia Strong and Ashley Campbell.
My name is Olivia Strong.
I'd like to read for Olivia. My name is Olivia. The Confederate flag on 70 is affecting the community and families. It's not right to see such large symbols. Large symbols affect the children. Love, Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia. Ashley Campbell, and then Dylan Mole.
Hello, good evening.
Good
Ashley
evening.
Campbell. I'm a Hillsborough resident. Yesterday, I noticed that the ordinance already has an FAQ page on the county's website, which basically reads as if it's already been passed. So it's discouraging already to have that out there because it gives the impression to dissenters for the ordinance, such as myself, that it's already been decided. So that's just an observation. So I agree with some of the other people who have commented that the progressive community of Orange County and across the nation has worked very hard to destroy public commemoration of the Confederacy. And like the museum here locally, Silent Sam as well. And you know, I've been in discussions just last summer, you know, about the student dress code and banning the Confederate flag, and everybody said then, well, no, we don't want to have any problem with what people put on their private property. It's not about that. It's only about public commemoration, public displays of the Confederate flag. But it suddenly is all changed, and now people can't even have private memorials on their private property, and that's, we all know that the ordinance was introduced because you want to limit a particular flag. We're not here thinking this is supposed to be content neutral. It's just to limit this particular flag. And supposedly that's because it's intimidating. Now, I can understand precisely why the Confederate flag is intimidating. It's has a terrible legacy behind it, but you know, as a conservative who lives in Orange County, something that I find intimidating are things like the letter to the community that you sent out after Trump was elected that basically told me that conservatives and people with conservative values weren't welcome in Orange County. I mean, just, thank you. So, you know, basically that was just a big screw you to all the conservatives who live here. And where was your letter to the Orange County GOP office to press for tolerance and understanding after their office was destroyed by arson? I didn't see anything like that after that. And instead, a legal election is supposed to be more traumatizing. And so, I could have been intimidated by treatment that I received at a Human Relations Commission event that I participated in last summer about the Confederate flag in schools, when people yelled in my face about basically how stupid I was. But I wasn't. I just kept on going with my life and turned the other direction. And I'm also really not pleased with the way that the Human Relations Commission's meeting about this ordinance was not promoted at all, and instead it became basically a progressive activist rally. So just please remember that your job as elected officials is to protect our rights, and that's your legitimate function as government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Dylan Mole and Catherine Walker.
Good evening. My name is Dylan, and I'm currently a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill here in Orange County. I am also a North Carolina native and have lived here my whole life. I'm here today to express my support for the amendment of banner display laws along the freeway. As you know, the objects in question are large, obtrusive battle flags that have been strategically placed in increments down the interstate. Along with their inherent danger as distractions to drivers, the rebel flags are massive symbols of white supremacy that have no place in an inclusive community like our own. To make my point, I'd like to bring attention to the most prominent party that opposes the regulation of flag sizes today, which is ACTBAC NC. ACTBAC is responsible for putting the flags in their current locations. For those who are not aware, ACTBAC is a Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group. Despite their heritage not hate facade, their sole purpose is to perpetuate the lost cause mythology of neo-Confederate culture and to intimidate people of color. By erecting massive rebel battle flags along the highway, they are doing just that and telling those who are not white that they're inhuman and unwelcome. This past Thursday, May the 10th, was North Carolina Confederate Memorial Day. ACTBAC held a rally at Graham Courthouse. Its leader, Gary Williamson, gave a speech which is on public record. It can be viewed online, and I have the URL here for anybody who wishes to read it. Although ACTBAC presents itself as a society for historical preservation, Williamson took this occasion to promote far-right propaganda, which can be found all throughout the speech. It is clear from the evidence that their goal as a group is less about honoring the dead and more about espousing white supremacist ideals. A few weeks ago, a fellow student and friend of mine attacked the monument known as Silent Sam on UNC's campus. She is an African-American woman, and after she took her action, she received threats of violence and lynching from supporters of the rebel flag, which included members of the ACTBAC group itself. That is what the Confederate flag stands for, and I hope you take that evidence into consideration when making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. With Catherine Walker and then Chuck Wingham.
I am Catherine, an Orange County resident, born and bred, and currently living just outside of Hillsborough town limits. My roots run deep in America, and my children's run even deeper in the South. But regardless of origins of longevity, the most important point is that we are Americans, and we live here in Orange County. I fully support adoption of the proposed ordinance tonight. Pick an amendment. If it's 4, if it's 7, whatever suits you best, but adopt one tonight. The wording clarifies rules about flags and flagpoles and is content neutral. There is no rational reason for delay. Small lots can ask for a variance. The Confederate movement has been a growing threat to our American way of life. The Confederate battle flag was not popular at the end of the Civil War. In fact, it's been mentioned, it was only one troop that had that flag. It has become a symbol to encourage violence and oppression after the release of Birth of a Nation, a film released by the KKK in the early 1900s. Southerners are better than to be called like sheep to a hateful cause. This is not a fight for freedom of speech. This here tonight is a fight for human decency. My Southern heritage does not depend on holding some false superiority due to my pale skin. I invite dissenters of this proposed amendment to grow beyond their old ways. Let's be Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. We have Chuck Wingham next, and then Kathy Arab.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Chuck Willingham. I'm a member I'm a resident of Orange County and a member of the Hate Free Schools Coalition. The UDO modification reasonably restricts flag size, height, and placement, and is content neutral. This balances freedom of speech and the property rights of neighbors, and I support that. As far as the Confederate flag, the argument of Southern pride and heritage and freedom of speech ignores race. The Southern argument is silent to the fact that the flag is used as a hate symbol by white supremacists and that the Confederate leaders supported slavery. The North and the South debate about which side was more barbaric during and after the war, while ignoring that both sides benefited from 250 years of kidnapping and enslaving Africans. The harm from these inhumane acts continue to impact African Americans and people of color today. Racial disparities exist in our education, healthcare, criminal justice, child welfare, and economic systems. America won't be great until race is no longer a predictor of outcomes. The path to that greatness will require the complete removal of the dominant white veil from the telling of our American history. This process continues with the opening of the National Museum of American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, and along with so many great authors from Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois to Michelle Alexander and Ibram Kendi. Next steps will need to include an overhaul of the teaching of American history in our own K-12 schools. Thank you for your courageous and swift action for updating the UOC.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We have Kathy Arab next, and then David Carpenter.
We don't need, I'm sorry, I'm Kathy Arab. We
Welcome.
don't need uniformity of flags in our county. Diversity and individualism are hallmarks of our nation, and as has been illustrated in our own artistic society, a community around here. Pardon me for this not being as eloquent as other people. I have just penned this tonight while I've been sitting here. Erasing our history by tearing down statues and restricting certain flags will not help us to avoid the mistakes of the past. I'm going to skip around a little bit, I think. As a Southerner, I would never display a Confederate flag. Much of our past is shameful. But our society has overcome the sins of the past in many, many ways, and we're not getting credit for it. Modern-day white supremacists are in the minority, and it is completely unfair to law-abiding, fair-minded citizens being punished because of a few white supremacists. Personal property is indeed protected by the Constitution, and so is freedom of expression. Flags are decorative. The government has no business poking around or photographing decorations in our home, on our property. Flags are an expression of free speech. Our personal style is not to be restricted unless we're in a neighborhood with guidelines to which we have committed ourselves. And in that situation, it is we, the people, who have talked with each other and agreed with each other about what those regulations should be. We have not been forced into it by some attorney or any government entities. I live in the woods. Our home, when we bought it 22 years ago, had a 2-story flagpole buried into the ground and rising above our swimming pool with a spotlight on the top. Am I going to have to remove that, dig that up out of my yard? I've lived there for over 20 years. Nobody's ever complained about it. And the only flag I've ever flown from it is a red, white, and blue stars and stripes. Why do you commissioners care now about regulating the height of my flagpole if an act of nature might remove it and it would have to be replaced? It sounds like it's because somebody with weak knees and a lack of American history in their mind disliked a flag somebody else flew. I may not like what somebody else does to their yard, but that's their prerogative. It's their private property. You guys have more important issues to oversee. I would recommend that you add a fourth option, D, and that is table this tedious, cumbersome, ridiculous, and unnecessary proposal. This ordinance is a slippery slope, chipping away at our Constitution. If free speech is not unlimited, then why is our beautiful Stars and Stripes flag allowed to be burned? And it is burned frequently. That is a bigger threat to me than a Confederate flag just flying around. Do the history on that. I see this action as burning an American flag, I see as treasonous. You don't need to infringe on our freedom of expression. Let us please educate ourselves. Government overreach is more harmful than a painted piece of fabric just hanging around.
David Carpenter and Billy Holloway.
Good evening. Good evening. Laws in general tend to be blunt instruments. They're usually crafted in response to specific situations and represent an attempt to resolve a problem or provide for particular needs. Even in best-case scenarios, laws do not always work in the ways they were intended to work. This does not mean, of course, that it is wrong to try to solve problems via appropriate legislation, just that the attempt is not always successful. The regulations being considered today are an attempt to address the problems caused by the responses some people have to seeing a Confederate flag. This is not, as I understand it, an attempt to address a widespread existing problem with giant flags flying from towering flagpoles right at the borders of people's property. But the content of flags cannot be regulated by the county, so this is an attempt to address the problem in a roundabout way. In the past, flags have been specifically exempted from county legislation governing signs on private property. It is not difficult to see why this has been the case. Flying flags has been a tradition that runs through the entire history of our nation. It is clearly a form of expression protected by the First Amendment's protection of free speech. Even burning flags on public property is protected, as some people have mentioned. Surely flying them on private property should be relatively uncontroversial. With these proposed regulations, the board is trying to make a law that is not just a blunt instrument designed for a particular purpose, even if it cannot always achieve the desired results. This law is not a blunt instrument, but the wrong instrument. This law will restrict our right to free speech. Americans, some of whom have fought in wars under our nation's flag, will be told they cannot even display that flag on their own property without onerous restrictions, which would, in many cases, particularly with the 50-foot setback from property lines, would make it impossible altogether. Is this what we want for Orange County? The proposed legislation was not properly designed to do the actual desired job. It is likely to do as much harm as good.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Billy Holloway and then Ken Rothrock.
Billy Holloway. I live right across the road where the flag is flying now. I look at it like this. It's private property. They went through all the proper channels to put this flag up, and it was agreed on to have the flag put there. They went through the permit process and everything. And now y'all are trying to change the rules to suit other people that don't even live there. They don't have to travel that road. It's a public road. They don't have, if you don't really look, you don't see the flag. But I mean, what happens? The flag don't really matter. What I'm wondering, well, y'all have purchased property joining me. Y'all have made promises that y'all would do this. So, I mean, if y'all can just come up and change rules as you please to suit what you want or suit certain people, what makes me think that you can't do the same thing to me down the road? I mean, it's just that simple. You seem like, I mean, everybody's got their right to do what they want to on their land, but you seem like you're trying to judge people for what they put up and judge people for what they do. I mean, we have legal rights just like anybody else does, so we ought to have some private property to do what we want to on our property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hull. Ken Rothrock and then Waddy Davis.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to address this issue. I'm Ken Rothrock. I practiced law 37 years in this county.
Mr. Rothrock, can you please speak into the microphone?
Yes, I think you can hear me.
Sir.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm also Cedar Grove Precinct Chairman for the Republican Party, and I am the Republican nominee for House District 50 this year. I've heard a lot of comments tonight on content, and my comments want to address that. Content is neutral here. We're just talking about flag numbers and sizes. And the first thing I might say is that the Constitution, which I've studied 40 years, sets out specifically what governments can do. All other rights are reserved to the people. The first question we should ask when government moves to infringe on any right is why? Why are you doing this? And quite appropriately, you start off here by saying the proposed regulations are necessary to ensure the uniformity with respect to size and numbers of flags that can be displayed on property. Now, the first question I would ask is why is that important to ensure the uniformity when we are such a diverse community? It just makes no sense for Orange County to seek this kind of uniformity. The other comment, I noted that the planning director who stood up here said when Ms. Price asked, why did you decide on 3 numbers as the number of flags? He said, because we didn't have enough time to think about it anymore, generally speaking. Well, that's a good reason to stop and give it a little more thought. And the other thing I have a real problem with, and possibly your attorney can help with this seems to violate the Equal Protection Clause a little bit in how it treats citizens. If you look closely at it, if you take a rich fella or woman who has a big home, tall home, several stories or whatever, they get to enjoy a much bigger flag. A fellow with not such a big, grandiose home, he can't have as big a flag. How does that make sense? That seems to be really looking at somebody's wealth as to how they're able to reflect their life. Ms. Price, you were very right. You need to address these issues and decide what is important, but first, why do you want to do this? I would urge you to do it. The comments about content of this messaging, I heard some very good comments. And I wish sometimes we could decide what somebody could say, but that's just not America. Even when people say things we don't want to hear, they have a right to say it. You just can't yell fire in the theater. So look carefully at this. God bless you. I need your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Rothrock. Waddy Davis and then Angelique Lawyer.
Good evening. I'm Waddy Davis of Chapel Hill. I'm a combat veteran of Vietnam and of late 3 years in Afghanistan. I've seen the full measure of heroic lives taken for the American cause in the shadow of the flag. If someone can burn the American flag in a public place, why can't someone exercise the First Amendment right to fly a national flag the size of their choice? Flags are painted on the sides of barns, large flags at places for law enforcement, fire stations, schools, banks, gas stations, etc. If you legislate the size of the flag, what is next on one's personal property? Recognize that flags or banners that are lewd or vulgar don't have a place to be shown to the sight of the public. So I appreciate your favorable consideration not to restrict the size of the flag. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your service to Orange County.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next week, lawyer, and then William Covington.
Hello, good morning, good evening to the commission. This morning, when I was watching the news, I had a visceral reaction to the news story about this town hall meeting. I've only been in Orange County as a property owner for a year, but I would say that I'm a retired Army nurse and have actually deployed several times and am a veteran of war. When I came here to do outreach, I did rural outreach, and I really enjoyed going to the high schools. And on one particular occasion, I was in the state van, and I was driving, and there was a large Confederate flag. It hit me somehow, and I continued to drive, and then I saw another. And then on the third one, I called my sister just to make sure I was going to be safe. What it means to a black woman, what it means to a person of color, what it means to someone of African descent is very much different than what it means to a white male or a white female in America. Statistics show that about 80 to 60%, depending on which study you read, 60 to 80% of white America believes it is a sign of Southern heritage. But if you conversely look at African Americans or people of color, it is 80% or higher, depending on the study, of people that see it as a racial affront and something that is hateful. I read a quote as I was contemplating on this. I'm sorry I'm not as eloquent as some of the other speakers, because it just hit me this morning. So that's why I'm in yoga, because my neighbor and my daughter came from yoga, and we headed straight over here from that. But the quote that I saw was by Gordon Rhea, who is actually a Southern historian, and I quote, "It is not an accident that the Confederate symbol has been the mainstay of supremacists and organizations from the Ku Klux Klan to skinheads. They did not appropriate the Confederate battle flag simply because it was pretty. They picked it because it was a flag of a nation dedicated to their ideals, that the Negro is not equal to the white man. The Confederate flag, we are told, represents heritage, not hate. But why should we celebrate heritage grounded in hate, and a heritage whose self-avowed reasons for existence was the exploitation and debasement of a sizable segment of the population?" Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lawyer. William Covington and then LaTondra Strong. Mr. Covington?
Carrington, Covington, Carrington.
Is Carrington? That would be you? Thank you, sir.
Just making sure.
It's hard to read your writing, but welcome.
I'm an author, and I sign a lot of books, and the more I sign, the worse my writing gets. I am a North Carolina native. My family goes back to 1775 in this particular area. I am a Civil War historian, an authority on flags, and I have published works. I believe that there is as much miscommunication, misinformation, and misunderstanding as there is accurate information out there. Night after night, I watch television, and I see people all the way into the United States Senate completely misquoting the United States Constitution. I personally think if you're going to hold that office, you ought to at least read the damn thing before you get to take the oath and hold office. As for that flag on 70, I haven't seen it yet. I do recognize that it is the Army of Northern Virginia pattern battle flag. That is not the flag that the Ku Klux Klan uses. It is, and it was a piece of military hardware. It didn't come about until after some duration of the war. They needed a flag that did not look like the United States flag. I happen to have a lot of history with flags, all kinds of flags. I have a United States flag on my mailbox. But my mentor as a writer was the late Chuck Stone, who was not only my mentor, he's the reason I became a writer, and he was a dear friend right up until his death. And he was a stellar example of the efforts during the civil rights movement to end segregation. I am offering some expertise for anybody that would like to discuss it for some real history. Back in the 1980s, when this same controversy came up in Durham and the Durham public schools, I was the one that was tasked with going around all the schools and doing flag presentations to explain the history of flags. And that was approved by both the African American organizations and the Board of Education in Durham. I'm not taking a side. I understand both sides of it. And I do think that Confederate military memorabilia actually belongs in museums, not on bumper stickers or handkerchiefs or stickers in the back windows of pickup trucks. I had ancestors on both sides in the war, probably both sides in the American Revolution. But I am offering, if anyone is interested in learning about those things or the actual history, to be available and willing to talk to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gumton. However, Latunda Strong and Hannah Schedulum?
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
They are not innocent remembrance of benign history. These monuments celebrate a fictional, sanitized Confederacy, ignoring the deaths, ignoring the enslavement, ignoring the terror that it actually stands for. That is a quote by the mayor of New Orleans after they removed the monuments in his city. I was really proud to see that courageous act by a leader, because it was a courageous act in the absence of crises. That leader went on to talk about children and how, as a leader, he could no longer stand in favor of having those monuments when he was asked to talk to young children. I have had to talk to lots of young children who have asked me over and over again, does this mean that I shouldn't be here? Does this mean that they hate me? Does this mean that I'm not wanted? And every time I hear a person who hasn't had to bear that tell me that my knees are weak, that I'm exaggerating, that somehow I've created this contentious environment, it sickens me. It is amazing how we somehow lose our sense of what is currently going on because it doesn't favor you. Now, I'm not a historian. I'm not. I was a mother who wrote a letter about the fear of her children when they went to school. And that was escalated once the schools passed the ordinance to this big flag. It's a statement. It's a statement saying you don't, your needs and your value is not important here. Me and my family's value is important here. And it does exactly what it's intended to do. I've had people of color tell me that they pass by and they go, what is that? And just like this woman said, I have been in places and seen the Confederate flag and had to wonder what is going to be next and if I'm in a safe environment. That's not something that people in a community should have to face. And that is the intention of that flag. Now, I have been in a lot of places this last year, and I have heard and I have tried to talk to people who believe differently than I do, to try to understand why they feel the way they do. And if it's anything that I feel that we're trying to erase the harm that was done to people, and we're trying to pretend like that doesn't happen. In closing, I want to thank you guys for your community conversation, and I want to ask you to continue that, because we have to continue talking these things out so that that people will understand why we have to pass ordinance, because they matter. Thank you.
Say your last name for me.
My name is Hannah Shellam. And I'm a newer resident of Orange County, but yes, I do pay taxes. In my statement of support for this ordinance, I want to stress those threats that were made tonight about putting up Confederate flags in response to a content-neutral ordinance. Connecting the Confederate flag to a threat is just a continuation of history of this country based in the enslavement and destruction of Black people for which these flags were originally flown. I'm a lesbian who's been threatened at a Confederate monument myself, which was Silent Sam to be exact, and that threat being brought into a content-neutral place is evident to me that people who are against this ordinance are pressed and are taking it all a little bit too personally. We're in a state that happily supports your rights to be related to and to support Confederate history and monuments. But what we must question is the effects rather than the intention of that history, and so I hope you've all been listening to people here who were harmed by those symbols. I don't just mean y'all in front of me. I hope you vote for this ordinance, and I want to remind you all that Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
That is all the people I have signed up. Does anyone else want to speak that did not sign up? Can you come to the podium, please, and tell us your name?
Adam Beeman. I'm on the planning board, and I'd like to address Mrs. Price's question to Mr. Harvey earlier. My personal opinion why you shouldn't hang 4 flags on one pole is a safety reason. If you look at the ratios, the flags are sized appropriately to the pole so that they don't come down in the wind. So that would be my question or answer to Mr. Harvey's question about the 4 flags. My biggest concern is the non-certified pole, and I would guess that the one on 70, it looks like some pipes that were welded together, and it's already bowing under its own weight. It's not very far off of 70. That provides a hazard to the people that drive up and down the roadway. If that huge flag catches wind on a windy day and snaps that pole across 70, who's responsible for that? Do they have enough insurance to cover that problem? I would ask that the people that have smaller lots, maybe their flagpole is reduced proportionally to what they have for a lot size. I would like to see the flagpole far enough back so that if it does fall, it cannot fall onto somebody else's property. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Mr. Roberts, do we need to close the public hearing before we have a discussion?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a motion to close public hearing.
So moved.
Second. Price and Burrows, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, folks, it's our turn to talk about this, and let me remind everyone again what we are doing. We are going to, if we would like, we're going to adopt the proposed amendments of Statement of Consistency, which is Attachment 3. And then we have either the ordinance and proposed UDO text amendment in Attachment 4, and then we would have to do the ordinance in Attachment 4 in conjunction with the attorney's notes, which are in Attachment 7. We could defer the decision later to the BOCC regular meeting date or refer it back to the planning board. So let's open the floor for discussion. Who would like to start? Okay, Commissioner Burrows.
So my thinking on this is that our current regulations are unclear, and that we certainly do have the authority to adopt clear standards to ensure safety and protect our local skylines. Other local governments have done this across the country. So I support this content-neutral amendment. I do also think that we should consider reducing the setback to 20 feet to tend to the 50-foot lot issue. And I would be interested in considering making just the two heights, the residential and the business level heights. I think that's something that I would support as well. That's what I got.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No one wants to say anything
Don't be shy,
tonight.
Commissioner Rickey.
Yeah, I don't have any particular concerns over the change, the amendment change. I also would support the slight tweaking of it for setbacks and pole height. What I do think, though, is that because this is a legislative decision, a public hearing is a legislative decision, that our legislative public hearings allow for comments at a later date. And if we make a decision tonight, that essentially makes that a moot point. So I would suggest that whatever we do, that we delay an action until June 19th. That moves it back 90 days, it moves it back 30 days to the second meeting in June. It allows for additional comment in case someone wishes to make a comment relative to information they've gleaned tonight or any other information, and I don't see that as an onerous delay.
Commissioner Markopoulos.
So these Confederate flags are abhorrent racist statements. There's no question about that. This is not something I take lightly. When I think about free speech and the content neutral aspect of this, it is something that we owe to the community to figure out, because we can't have people in our community feeling threatened by aggressive statements that these flags are making. And while this came to us because of the Confederate flag issue, I thought long and hard about this. If there had been a giant flag put up on the interstate with a 15-foot high kitten on it, it would have attracted our attention as well, just the sheer size of it. And it's akin to a noise ordinance or any other ordinance that is designed to help people live together and respect each other. You know, if you can go play your acoustic guitar on your back deck, but you can't get your heavy metal band out there and turn it up to 11 and blow out your neighbors, right? I mean, it's just simple courtesy on one level. And freedom of expression, it doesn't take away anyone's freedom of expression in the same way that regulating the sound of the volume of the music you play doesn't take away your ability to play music, enjoy music, talk about music. It's the volume and it's the aggressive nature and the imposition that we're talking about. So I think this is a really good ordinance that addresses a whole range of issues that would fall under a content neutral category. And just one quick observation. Everybody talks about history, and we hear people mentioning different versions of history. I mean, I think this issue and this issue all across the country really points to a great failure of our educational system, that we and our children and our parents before us didn't grow up learning the real history of racism and the real history of these issues as they continue to eat at us in so many ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Markopoulos. Anyone else?
You want to go ahead?
Commissioner Jacobs, please.
I was, at the beginning, skeptical about changing the ordinance. I'm more comfortable with the idea that we're attempting to do something that's value neutral. As far as, I thought Mr. Covington's remarks the only neutral remarks that were made were worth following up on. I totally reject the characterization of the community conversation that was held by the Human Rights Commission as what was it called? A progressive activist rally. It was the first time we actually, just like tonight, had different views expressed in the same room, and people reacting to one another. That's what we need. We need more conversations just like this, less like set pieces, and more like we want to understand what the other person is talking about. I'm not sure that our society is willing to do that anymore. It's one of the real great tragedies of American democracy is that we're all, in our own ways, tearing it apart. But I think that there are a lot of intelligent people here who made intelligent remarks, and I think that next time we have a community conversation, we should ask Mr. Covington to come and... Carrington, sorry, sir. Carrington, to come and give us a little bit of a history of whatever he wants to give us regarding the flags of the, I assume it's of the Civil War.
Well, flags of the United States.
Okay,
And
well-
North Carolina and the Civil War.
If we assume that the Confederacy is a part of the United States, which I wouldn't, but I understand what you're saying. I think we had an experience as a Board of Commissioners where we were trying to prevent hunting deer with dogs because people were allowing their dogs to go across other people's property without permission. Seemed like a pretty straightforward property rights situation, and the state legislature wouldn't even let us discuss it to get the legislation passed, because people have changing opinions about what private property rights mean depending on whether it suits them or not. It's not an absolute. It's a moving target depending on your perspective. So I don't see a problem with government trying to reduce some impacts off-site, whether it's an excessively large flag. The one that I first saw that bothered me was the Bob Evans restaurant in Durham, which had a gigantic American flag. It wasn't that I objected to what the flag was, it was just too big. And they changed their ordinances to reflect that. And so I think what we're doing is trying to make a change, just like a change where you tell somebody they can't pour motor oil in the stream that flows through their neighbor's yard. It's just trying to regulate effects on other people. It's not an expression of what it is you're doing, it's the size of the flag. At least that's the way it's being presented to us. And I would love to talk more about flags, about the Confederate flag, and about its uses in the 1860s versus the uses in the 1960s, which I think are much more onerous even than I get the Confederacy. I don't necessarily think that what people were fighting for was simply their family and their state, which are noble things to fight for. But the 1960s, when integration came in, the Confederate flag's use totally changed, and I don't recall hearing anybody who was a supporter of the Confederacy or the Confederate heritage objecting when Governor Wallace put the Confederate flags on the helmets of his troops as they beat people on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Commissioner Price, any comments?
I really doubt that I have to say much as far as my opinion of the Confederate flag and my need for it. But I do want to thank folks for coming out and speaking. And I think that in general, my sentiments have been expressed by the people.
Thank you. I also want to thank everybody for coming out. I appreciate the conversation. It is always good to hear more than one side. Something that sticks with me is when Commissioner Markopoulos talked about safety and living together. I think the number one job of the county commissioner is keeping our residents safe. And if you don't feel safe, that means we're not doing our job. I think we owe you a decision tonight. With all due respect, Commissioner McKee, I think that I feel like we should make a decision tonight. It's part of the Unified Development Ordinance, which is a living document. We change the Unified Development Ordinance. We amend the Unified Development Ordinance almost at every meeting. And we will do that with this ordinance as well. We will look into this. We will find glitches. We will go back and consider it, just like we go back and consider all our ordinances. So I am in favor of both what the planning board approved, which was Amendment 4, along with Amendment 7 that came forth with the attorney's recommendations. And I think that if Commissioner Dorson was here, he would say this is government in action, everybody interacting and having a conversation. So with that, I'd like to know what the pleasure of the board is. Commissioner McKee.
Yes, I do disagree with you on an immediate decision. This board is noted for turning over every stone, getting every bit of information out, getting every bit of conversation that might possibly be coming forward before we make decisions. So in the spirit of Commissioner Jacobs' comment about more community discussion, and I'm not just talking about discussion in here, but we need to have more community discussion after we make a decision. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to defer the decision to June 19th in order to allow for additional comments from the public that might be generated by public comment tonight, and we'll see if I get a second, and we'll see if it passes.
Do we have a second? And that motion dies. Commissioner Jacobs.
I have a question for Mr. Harvey.
Mr. Harvey.
We had someone here who expressed a concern about the height of the flag pole versus the setback, and whether the flag pole could be moved so close that it would land on someone else's property. Is that something that you discussed in talking about the setbacks, and is that something that you think is worth revisiting?
That is something that has been discussed since the board directed staff, the attorney's office, and the planning department to review the matter. I think we've been as equitable as we can be. I want to remind the board members that flag poles erected on non-residential property, commercial property, would have to get appropriate building permits in order to guarantee wind load. Flag poles erected on residential property under the state building code don't necessarily have to get a building permit, which is some of the frustration I think was expressed at the planning board meeting. It's not viewed as a commercial component. I think there's been a lot of discussion about what is reasonable. I think Commissioner Price noted that we came up with a reasonable standard that was provided to the planning board. There were concerns expressed about smaller lots, which is why you have the county attorney also asking you to consider a modification in order to address not only smaller lots, but also eliminate what could be construed as contradictory height limits for poles, so you have one size fits all. I think that ultimately the elected officials are going to provide the staff direction on how this amendment package is going to go. A 24-foot flagpole 20 feet from a property line is fairly consistent with current regulatory standards governing setbacks already, and I don't think you're going to necessarily have any greater chance for adverse impact with a 20-foot setback. Obviously, if it was a 50-foot setback, the issue is the pole would fall on the property, but you would be requiring owners of smaller lots to get variances to erect a flagpole, and I think that was the county attorney's primary justification for providing a secondary recommendation to you this evening.
Commissioner Markopoulos.
So I just want to get a couple clarifications. So with this attachment 4, including the proposed UDO text amendments, and attachment 7 that we're considering, right? That has the 1-year amortization?
They both have a one-year amortization for flags.
And does this exempt schools and fire departments and county buildings?
No, sir.
Neither ordinance proposal would exempt
Okay.
any land use activity.
Right.
And
So,
it's based on, obviously, zoning. So if
Right.
it's in a residential district, there is a standard. If it's in a non-residential district, there's going to be a standard.
so this could potentially cost the schools money and fire departments money at a certain time to react to this?
I think that the best answer to, I think where you're going with this, Commissioner Markopoulos, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think where you're going with this is that at some point, any individual that has a flag that is non-compliant with the code and has to bring it into compliance with the code, doesn't matter if it's the school system, county government, or local resident, the flag will have to be brought in compliance with the code.
Got it. And we have the consistent height as part of that, correct?
Yes, sir. Well, that is recommended in attachment 7.
Yes, okay. So I'm good with that, with the thought that maybe a future UDO discussion could be had around exempting the schools and fire departments and other agencies in that realm to see if it's worth exempting them from making the flagpole changes. But that would be a future discussion. That I wouldn't want to have a far-flung discussion tonight about that, but I'd like to see that considered.
Commissioner Price?
Yes, is there any, well, two questions. One, do the towns have similar ordinances on flags? And secondly, thinking about the fact that, you know, some of the schools are located within the towns, the municipalities, are we going to, if they don't have similar ordinances, are we going to ask them to adopt similar?
Let me start by answering your question this way. Obviously, towns can choose to or not regulate this matter consistent with their enabling authority.
Mm-hmm.
There are communities in Orange County that have standards governing the erection of flags. This ordinance is modeled on certain provisions from Durham in terms of size limits and height limits. Towns of Chapel Hill and Carborough exempt American flags, would exempt state flags, would require permits for any other flag, especially flags that are considered to be commercial in nature. Town of Hillsborough specifically exempts the American and the state flag, allow it to be 100 feet in area, but would require permit for any other flag. They also do not regulate the height of flagpoles. Chapel Hill would exempt certain flags that do not have a commercial component to it. They don't have necessarily a height limit or a setback limit. The fact that Orange County does or does not adopt an ordinance doesn't compel the local municipalities to do anything different than they either have done or will do. The question that they'll have to answer at the appropriate time is their ordinance content neutral, and that's between their planning departments, their elected officials, and their attorney staff. Obviously, our interest is to provide an ordinance amendment that continues the content neutrality of the existing sign ordinance.
Right, I understand that, but, you know, so many people that live in the towns, in the municipalities, have come forth to speak. I would just hope that we have similar ordinances throughout the county at some point. I know they don't have to be the same, I'm
Well,
just saying.
I think that, as you have pointed out at different occasions on different issues, Orange County issues are unique to a certain degree and may not be experienced by the towns of Hillsborough, Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Orange County may not experience an issue similarly as Carborough or Chapel Hill. It's the individuality of the community that dictates some of these standards and governmental regulations. And I think that's also going to be preserved as we move forward.
And what about for the schools? How would they, if they're located within the municipalities?
They would have to abide by any applicable municipal ordinance.
Okay.
Commissioner Jacobs?
You done? Yeah. I'm just looking to see, in trying to achieve uniformity, is it clear in the ordinance that we're talking about a maximum height? I can have a 5-foot flagpole if I want, can I not?
Yes. Maximum height would be 24 feet in residential districts and 54 feet in non-residential districts. That's the maximum height allowed.
Okay. Because the way we've been discussing it, it's one height and it's 24 feet. So I just want to be clear that it's up to 24 feet, but not limited to 24 feet.
Correct. It could be 12, it could be 18, it could be 16, it could be no higher than 24.
I'm sure, knowing you, can you tell me where I can find
It's
that?
on page 19,
It's on page 19.
number 2.
Thank you.
Each flag shall be maximum of maximum. While you're looking for that, can I go to Commissioner McKee? Commissioner McKee?
Yes, I understand Commissioner Markopoulos' concern over the impact to the county and the fire departments and the schools.
Got it.
That, in fact, is why I asked how many poles and those government entities might be out of compliance. But while I understand the concern, I would absolutely oppose exempting ourselves for any regulations we impose on everyone else.
Okay, so we need a motion of consistency first. Would you like to do that first, Mr. Harvey?
I would recommend that this board take action on the statement of consistency as contained in attachment 3. And then obviously, there's going to have to be some decision on whether or not you're going with the ordinance as recommended in attachment 4 or as revised by the attorney in attachment 7.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve the statement of consistency, which is attachment 3.
So moved?
Second.
Burrows and Jacobs, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. And then we need to have a motion to, well, we need to pass the amendment 4, but then we can pass 4 with 7, is that correct? Or could we just?
You can do
oppose?
either 4 or 7.
4 or 7?
Yes.
Okay. So I need a motion on what the board would like to do on that.
7 includes 4, right?
7 would,
Yes.
just, it amends 4, but it's
Correct.
written.
It includes all the same
Right.
information with 2 amendments.
I'll move that.
So Markopoulos is going to move attachment 7,
Second.
second by Jacobs. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, and that passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Madam Chair, may I ask the manager?
Yes, sir.
I think we should follow up on having more community conversations and ask the Human Relations Commission and the Human Rights and Relations Department to work on having another community conversation on, not on the topic of height of flags or size of flags, but on the issue of different flags and how they affect people differently in Orange County.
I will speak with the department director. However, she did get the message the last time that there was an interest for another one, and I'll talk with her about the flags and the history of flags as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought that was really helpful. That's good.
Just give it a second here.
What do we have left?
We have the regular agenda, we have none. Number 7 is reports. We do not have anything there. County Manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. The only thing I'd like to report tonight is on Thursday evening, we have a public hearing on the fiscal year 2018-19 operating and capital investment plan, and it will be here at 7 o'clock at the Southern Human Services Center. And that's all I have to report this evening.
Thank you. County Attorney's report.
Some of you may not have seen, as you're aware, the county is involved in nationwide litigation against opioid manufacturers, and today the North Carolina Attorney General decided to join with other attorneys general across the country to also engage in litigation against at least one opioid manufacturer, Purdue Pharma. So that is gaining steam and momentum, and now multiple states are involved as well.
Thank you, sir. There are some additional information items. You can all take a look at that and follow-up actions. And we have no closed session tonight, so I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.